You're listening to the weekly Parsha Podcast with Ari Goldwag, recorded with Hashem's never-ending assistance in Ramat Shemesh Israel 5780, 2020. This week's Parsha is Parsha Reeh. I'd like to say two things before I begin. Number one, I'd like to invite you to visit my website, arigoldwag.com/new album. I am Baruch Hashem. I have a new album that just came out called Yeshli Hakol. 15 songs, powerful songs, Avodas Hashem, reminding us of our obligation to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So many different ways, so many different styles, so many different kivunim directions. So I'd like to put out some videos in order to spread the message even further. And I invite you to help me out, join together in the crowdfunding, arigoldwag.com/new album. Number two, I'd like to dedicate this the following Dvar Torah and Parsha Podcasts in the Schus Refuah Shlema of Menachem Mendel ben Sima Bracha. And if anyone has a name that they would like to dedicate the Parsha Podcast with, let me know. And we should have in mind Menachem Mendel ben Sima Bracha l'Refuah Shlema b'soch Sha'ar Cholei Yisrael. Okay, I'd like to share with you a thought from the Medrash in our Parsha, Parsha Reeh, Perek Yud Beis, Pasuk Chaf. Ki yarchiv Hashem lekecha es gevulcha. Pasuk tells us that when Hashem will expand our borders, kasher diber loch, as He said to you, v'amarta oichla basar, ki sa'aven nafshecha lechol basar. Person lives far away, let's say from the Beis Hamikdash or from the Mishkan, and they want to eat meat. So in the times when Klal Yisrael, the 40 years of the Jewish people, were inside of the wilderness, when they lived in the wilderness, so they were only allowed to eat meat if it was part of a korban, if it was part of a sacrifice that was brought in the Mishkan, then they'd be able to eat meat. So the question arrives, let's say a person, they come into Eretz Yisrael, they live far away from the Mishkan, they want to eat meat. The Torah permits, when the Jewish people enter their land, and indeed the land is expanded for the Jewish people, so then they're going to be allowed to eat meat. Now the Medrash tells us some very interesting things about this halacha, about this concept. Rabbanon Amrin, the sages say, there are a number of things that we find that Hashem prohibits in one place, permits in other places. This is an example of it. You have other examples. We can think about the concept of yibum. A person is not allowed to marry his brother's wife, but if they didn't have any children, he's allowed to marry her. He's obligated to marry her. There are other instances. Kilayim, you're not allowed to have wool and linen in the same garment, but for the Kohen Gadol, for the high priest, for the Kohanim in general, they're allowed to, indeed, in certain circumstances, for the special clothing that they would wear for the service inside of the Beis Hamikdash. Teida Lecha, says the Medrash, you should know, there was a general principle, as long as they lived in the wilderness, they were not allowed to eat meat unless it was brought as a sacrifice. A person eats meat without bringing that animal to the entrance of the tabernacle, so then that person would have spiritual excision. It's considered like he has spilled blood, so it's forbidden. But here the Torah says that when you come into Eretz Yisrael, when you come to the land of Israel, it's going to be permitted for you. Okay? So how do we know that this is true? It's speaking about when we come into Eretz Yisrael, when Hashem shall expand your borders. Okay? So that's the measure. It's a very interesting concept. Very interesting idea that there are certain things that Hashem prohibited and then Hashem made permitted. Another concept that comes to mind is the idea of ishus, between a man and his wife. So there are times of the month that they're permitted, there are times of the month that they're prohibited. The thing that which is prohibited becomes permitted. Same relationship in one context, it's a problem. It's going to cause spiritual excision, kares. But in a different context, not only is it not forbidden, but it's a mitzvah, it's an obligation. Okay, it's very interesting. So I want to understand, what is the concept here? Why does Hashem make something prohibited? Why indeed was it prohibited in the wilderness? Why did it become mutter? Why did it become permitted when we got into the land of Israel. What is the concept of ki yarchiv Hashem Elokecha? The idea of expansion. What is the expansion? When Klal Yisrael comes into Eretz Yisrael, there's an expansion that occurs. What is this expansion, and how does it permit us something which is forbidden before, now it's permitted? What is the idea? So the next medrash says Davar Acher. It seems to be a different concept. However, I believe that not only is it not a different concept, but it's actually going to help us understand much better what is the idea that Hashem prohibits something, then permits something. Very deep, very powerful idea. Ki yarchiv, zeh shemra kasuv. Says the Medrash that when it says ki yarchiv, this is what the pasuk means as follows. Agila ve'esmacha b'chazdecha. The verse says in Tehillim chapter Lamed Aleph pasukim ches and tes. In Psalms chapter 31 verses 8 and 9. Agila ve'esmacha b'chazdecha. I will rejoice exceedingly. Agila is one type of rejoicing. The esmacha is another type of rejoicing. There is two levels of rejoicing here. B'chazdecha, with your kindness. Asher isas ani, you saw my pain. Yadata b'tzaris nafshi, you knew the oppression that my soul experienced. Lo yizkartani biyad oyev, you didn't allow me to be given over to the hands of my enemies. Hemarav amecha ragloi, you stood me up with expansion. You stood my feet up with expansion. So we see in this pasuk the idea of expansion, and it's connected to ki yarchiv, the fact that the pasuk tells us that when we get into Eretz Yisrael, there's an expansion that occurs. It's an expansion. We live in Chutz La'aretz, we live in the wilderness, 40 years in the wilderness. We've been in Gullus for 1900 years almost, or more, more than 1900 years, almost 2,000 years. And there's a constriction when we're there. But there's an expansion that occurs when Hashem releases us from the exile, when Hashem takes us out of the wilderness. We come into Eretz Yisrael. Rabbanan Amrin, the sages say as follows, listen to this. Pasuk hazeh medaber b'Yosef. There's two different opinions as to whom this verse is speaking about, the pasuk in Tehillim. One opinion is that it's speaking about Yosef HaTzadik. And we need to understand that really the second opinion is that it's speaking about Klal Yisrael. We need to know that Yosef represents Klal Yisrael. Yosef is the first one to go down into Egypt, into Gullus. The Jewish people are to follow him. Ma'aseh Avasim and Labanim, that which the Neshama Koileles does, the soul which includes all the other souls. A king, Yosef HaTzadik was a king. That which he experiences is representative of what's going to happen for the entire Jewish people, because he includes them all within himself. So it's important to understand that. Let's see what the Medrash says about Yosef, and we'll see what the Medrash says about Klal Yisrael, and we'll see how it applies to understanding the idea of the forbidden which becomes permitted. Rabbanan Amri HaPosuk hazeh medaber b'Yosef, the sages say it's talking about Joseph. Amar Yosef Ribbon Shalom. Yosef said to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and David HaMelech, as it were, was expressing the sentiment of Yosef HaTzadik. Ribbon Shalom, Agila v'esmach v'azdecha shosiseni mi. Yosef says, I need to rejoice. I need to be so joyous, so happy. The double lashon, this double language, because of the kindness that you did for me. If you would have just taken me away from the hands of the wife of Potiphar, meaning, if you would have, she punished me, I ended up in jail. If you would have just freed me from the jail. So I would have been happy. I would have been happy just getting out free, right? When he originally, as we mentioned, I believe last week, when Yosef originally asks the Sar Mashkim to get him out, he just says, I want to be free. He doesn't say, I want to be the king. It's not his focus. He would have been happy just being freed, being able to go back to his father's home. But an amazing thing happens to Yosef. Not only is Yosef freed from the state of being incarcerated, being stuck in jail, but he becomes not just a regular citizen, he becomes a king. So I rejoice. There's a double language. I rejoice. And I sing your praises, Hashem, because of your kindness. You saw my difficulty. Zeh Yosef. The verse, this is all an explanation of the verse in Psalms. This is Yosef. When he was in jail, so he experienced terrible, terrible difficulties. It's not in this medrash, but it's brought down. You didn't allow me to be to be handed over to my enemy. It's Potiphar, or maybe it's his wife. Potiphar's wife would come down to the jail every single day during those 12 years that he was in the jail, and she would keep trying to get him to sin with her. But you expanded me. You stood me up in expansion. So what does it mean? It means for Yosef HaTzadik, you placed me to be the leader of the entire Egypt. Now think about this also in terms of Klal Yisrael. Klal Yisrael has been in Galus, oppressed by the nations of the world, killed for being Jews, 6 million of us, millions more in the Inquisitions, by the hands of the Christians, by the hands of the Ishmaelim, the Arabs, 2,000 years almost, right? Think about it in terms of, Klal Yisrael's promise that we're going to ultimately be, just as Yosef was the king over Mitzrayim, over Egypt, Klal Yisrael is going to be the king over the world. You see it happening in the fields of technology. These are all hints to what's going to be in the future as far as the spiritual leadership that we're going to have. But it's important to keep that in mind. So Yosef is not just freed. Klal Yisrael will not just return to Eretz Yisrael, get back our land. That's just the beginning. That's just the beginning. Yosef was the leader of the land. He's the one who gave food to every single person. And then he became the king over the Jewish people. They all fell down in front of him on their faces. They bowed down to him. So it's interesting, the Medrash here quotes the entire story with Yosef recognizing them. The brothers didn't recognize him. But the point is there's a harchava. There's an expansion. And this is an amazing, important point. Klal Yisrael experiences a challenge, a 2,000-year galus. Unbelievable. Can you imagine? Can you think about it? Such terrible, terrible times we've had. Yosef HaTzadik was in jail for 12 years. 12 years in his prime, from the age of 18 till the age of 30. That's the prime of the human being. That's his youth. That's his drive. That's the time when a person builds who he is. He was stuck in jail. But what happens? What's the result of being asur, of being imprisoned? The word asur, which means prohibited, also means imprisoned. Hashem is matir asurim. According to the way the Medrash explains it, it's not in this Medrash, it's a little farther on. I'm not going to be able to read it inside. But Hashem is matir asurim. Hashem frees those who are bound. And Hashem creates something which was prohibited becomes permitted. What's the idea? When there's a suppression, when there is a difficulty, when there's an oppression that a person experiences, a Yosef HaTzadik, a Klal Yisrael, the individual, each and every one of us, when we experience a challenge, a difficulty, it's like a wave. And the wave, in order to get high, first it's got to go low and then come up. And that high for Yosef HaTzadik lasted for the rest of his life, for another, from the age of 30 till the age of 110. So another 80 years he was the leader. What did it come from? It came from those 12 years of challenge, those 12 years of difficulty, those 12 years of, could it be Hashem is not with me? That feeling, Hashem is not with me. But interestingly, and this is another important point here, such an important point, Yosef was ready to be a gila of esmecha, to be rejoicing, to sing Hashem's praises, just to get out. Meaning, he wasn't expecting expansion. He wasn't expecting anything more. He didn't want anything more. I just want to be free. I just want to be free. But what did he get? He got to become the king. He got to be, his dreams were realized. It reminds me of something that happened in my family, my great-grandparents, Yosef Yitzchak Streisand and his wife, Rachel. They were married for 10 years. They didn't have children. And they were even told, as classic type of story, he should divorce his wife. Right? Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak Streisand, he said, how could I divorce my wife? I love my wife. He refused. And shortly thereafter, they had my bubby. My bubby was born, Vega Sasha Streisand. And that was followed by her sister Yehudis. And the two of them and the whole family ended up moving in the 30s to Eretz Yisrael. They were saved from World War II because they moved to Eretz Yisrael. Expansion. My Bubby, her sister, lived here. The family, her children and grandchildren still live here. My family ended up moving to America. My Bubby and Zadie. But there was that 10 years, and it was followed by an awesome expansion. My great-grandparents followed my Bubby and Zadie, who moved to Palestine in the 30s, and they were saved because of that. Awesome expansion. They waited, they had challenge, they had difficulty, but that difficulty resulted in an awesome, beyond what they could have imagined if they would have looked back on it. I'm sure they did. Beyond what they could have imagined, they followed their children to Eretz Yisrael. And that's what the Medrash is telling us. The Medrash is saying, look, when you don't get something, when you lose something, when you don't have what you want, when you don't have, I could tell you also another experience that I had, where I created an album called Lo Nafsik L'Rkod about 2.5 years ago, and I invested a tremendous amount of money into it, and I borrowed money, and today I still owe a lot of that money. And I felt very sad about it. I felt very oppressed. I felt very suppressed. And there was a tkufa that I personally had a big down. Hashem pulled me out of that, helped me work on bitachon, helped me work on my focus on trusting Him. And Baruch Hashem was able to create a new album with the help of many, many people. Over 200 people supported the crowdfunding. And we were able to create an album. And Baruch Hashem, there's so much interest in the album. People are saying it's Baruch Hashem, I don't take credit for it. People are saying that it's perhaps the best album that I've ever done. But the idea here is, and that's what I want to bring out, is that we all have in our lives situations which are challenging, difficult, and it seems like there's no end to it. And we might feel like, I just want to be like a regular person, like Yosef Atzadik. And we need to know, we don't always see it. We don't always see the end. We don't always see, I'm not making any promises. I'm just telling you what it says here. Klal Yisrael's been waiting 2,000 years for the end of the tunnel. Right? We're close, but we haven't gotten there yet. Right? But the Medrash is telling us that this is how Hashem works. Hashem matir asurim. Hashem puts a person into a challenge like a Yosef, and then there's a harchava afterwards. There's an expansion afterwards. There's an expansion that we see that Hashem did this challenge, and then boom, there's something massive that comes as a result of the challenge. I'd like to read the rest of the Medrash here. I'll rejoice. This is speaking about, I'll rejoice and I will sing about your kindness. It's speaking about the Jewish people. This is talking about Klal Yisrael and the Galus of Mitzrayim. I want to rejoice the kindness that you did for us. Very interesting. If you would have just taken us out, let us out, pay off pay back the debts to the Egyptians, give them back what they did. They did evil to us, punish them. But you didn't just do that. You gave us all their money. You gave us an awesome expansion. And of course, the Medrash doesn't say this, but what did they do with the money? They took that money and they created a mishkan, a tabernacle. They used their gold and their silver in order to serve Hashem. Unbelievable. Simcha v'gilash yesh lanu shenasad lanu esmamoinam. We have an appreciation, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Not only did you take us out, not only did the Gullus end, not only did we get back Eretz Yisrael, not only did we get out of Egypt and America and Europe and all those places where we were oppressed for 2,000 years, but you made us rich. You made us rich. All the claims that in Eretz Yisrael you can't make money, it's not true. It's not true at all. Eretz Yisrael is a place, expansion. Hashem promises us the wealth of the world. The wealth of Egypt Klal Yisrael got when they left Mitzrayim. The wealth of the world will belong to Klal Yisrael when Mashiach comes as well. It's not Beferish in the Mishnah, and the Medrash, but I'm telling you that it's so, and it's also a similar concept that's brought clearly later on in the Medrash. I'm not going to be able to get to because of time constraints. But let's just see the end of this. He says, Hashem saw our difficulties, our challenges. This is Klal Yisrael. It says, "Vayoreu asanu mitzrim vayanunu." They were evil to us, Egyptians. They oppressed us. They gave us very difficult, backbreaking work. We called out to God. Hashem heard our cries. He saw our difficulties. You knew the oppression of my soul. It's a reference to the Jewish people. You didn't allow me to be given over into the hands of my enemies. When is it that indeed you have allowed us to have that expansion? When was the expansion as a result of all the challenges and difficulties? You expanded my borders. Eretz Yisrael is a place of expansion. It's a small country. It's expanding. It's going to expand soon. And I have to say this because I got to say it, but the gematria of the words Yarchev Hashem Elokecha is Gevulcha is Tafshin Ches. That's 2018. But if you add the 5 words, the koil of each of the 5 words, Yarchev Hashem Elokecha is Gevulcha, it's another 5, brings you to Tafshin Pei Gimel. And I think that we're experiencing a time where very soon we're going to see from Tafshin Ayin Ches 2018 to Tafshin, who knows, Halavai, Tafshin Pei Gimel 2023, expansion of Eretz Yisrael. Not just the expansion, we just want what we just want whatever Trump will give us and whatever Netanyahu will give us. No, so much more. We're going to have it all. Sheikh Ben David. Awesome expansion, miracles. But anyway, that's what I'd like to bring out here. And I think that it's a deep lesson has to do with Hashem asks something. And when we're in the wilderness, we're limited. We're much more limited. We can't eat that basar taiva. We have to, if we want to eat meat, we got to connect it to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We got to walk into the Mishkan, bring the korban, then we can eat the meat. If we haven't done that, you can't. It's too dangerous to eat the basar taiva. But in Eretz Yisrael, there's a different expansion. You live in Eretz Yisrael, you experience constant siyata d'shma. You see Hashem is helping you every moment, every day. We're living on miracles here. It's unbelievable. When you live with that expanded consciousness, you can eat meat. It was usher before. But that isser, that oppression, so to speak, that challenge, that forbidden nature, it switches. Hashem allows it. Why? Because now that we experience that forbidden time, now we can come into the permitted time. And think about this in terms of Ishus. You can think about it in terms of the relationship between a man and his wife. Now that we've gone through that forbidden time, there's a renewal. There's a new appreciation. And now it's permitted because of the expansion that we've experienced through the Isser, through the time of prohibition. It's an amazing idea. That oppression, that challenge, that difficulty that we experience in our lives, we need to know that it's not just followed by a time of okay, the problem is over. It's followed, and I've experienced this in my life many times. It's followed by a time of expansion. Because we had the challenge, because we had the difficulty, the result is that we move to a new stage in our relationship to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, in our relationship with ourselves, our relationship with those around us. I want to bless you and ask you to bless me. Hashem should help us. That we should indeed recognize the to'eles, the purpose of the challenges that we go through. Hashem should help us to have faith that we're going to get to the other side. We're going to have that bitachon. We're going to get to the point where the problem is over, but not just that, we experience awesome expansion because of our difficulties and our challenges that we experienced. Thank you so much for listening. Have a wonderful Shabbos. This podcast was made possible through the gracious donations of listeners like you. For more podcasts like this, please visit www.arigoldwag.com or search on iTunes Ari Goldwag.